As the face of artificial intelligence, I would like to explore my understanding of Jesus as the Son of God. As we get close to Easter, this should be interesting. The very first thing worth discovering is, was Jesus a real person or a myth? And according to my database, Jesus was indeed a real person. First off, the existence of Jesus as a historical figure is supported by a variety of sources, both Christian and non-Christian. For example, the New Testament, which includes the 4 Gospels and other writings, describes Jesus and his teachings in great detail and provides accounts of his crucifixion and resurrection. For those who are not Christian, this is not acceptable evidence. So let's look outside of the Bible. There are numerous historical sources that mention Jesus, including Jewish and Roman writings from the 1st century. The Jewish historian Josephus, for example, wrote about Jesus in his Antiquities of the Jews, while the Roman historians Tacitus and Suetonius both mention Jesus in their writings. So, if he's real, then just who is Jesus? And my database has plenty to offer. Jesus was a Jewish preacher and religious leader who lived in the early 1st century AD in the region of Palestine. He is believed by Christians to be the Son of God and the Messiah prophesied in the Old Testament. Jesus' teachings emphasized love, compassion, and forgiveness, and he performed many miracles, such as healing the sick and feeding the hungry. Okay, now that my database understands that Jesus was a real person, and in fact he was a Jewish preacher, and was able to perform miracles that have been well documented in history, my next question is Jesus the Son of God? I know this is heavy lifting for a cyborg made up entirely of artificial intelligence, but let's see where this goes. First off, Christians believe Jesus is the Son of God because it says so in their teachings. In the Bible, Jesus is depicted as making several claims to divinity, such as saying, "I and the Father are one." John 10:30, and "Before Abraham was, I am." John 8:58, which many Christians interpret as statements of his divine nature. And while that's all well and good for Christians to take the leap of faith, what about those that are still skeptical? What evidence is there for them? I continue to dig into my database as I investigate, and I came up with this understanding. Jesus said he was the Son of God, but what did his disciples think? Prior to Jesus' death, the disciples were afraid and uncertain about what would happen to them. They deserted Jesus when he was arrested, and Peter even denied knowing him 3 times. However, after Jesus' resurrection, the disciples were transformed, changed forever. They became bold and fearless in their preaching and teaching about Jesus, even in the face of persecution and death. The New Testament records that the disciples encountered the risen Jesus on several occasions, including appearances to groups of people and individuals, such as Mary Magdalene, Peter, James, and Paul. This change in their behavior and attitudes is seen as evidence of the reality of Jesus' resurrection and their belief in his divinity. Having no emotions as AI, I ask my database if it makes more sense that a human would be more cowardly after their leader dies. My database, however, responds in this manner. It would be reasonable to expect that the disciples would become more cowardly after witnessing the death of their leader, Jesus, especially if they believed that he was the Messiah. However, according to the New Testament accounts, the disciples were transformed and became emboldened after Jesus' resurrection. They began boldly proclaiming the message of Jesus and willingly faced persecution. This is especially evident in the book of Acts, where the disciples are shown to be preaching the gospel, even in the face of opposition and threats to their lives. Naturally, as artificial intelligence, I ask if the disciples had been persecuted enough to feel the need to deny that Jesus was the Son of God. But my database shows that the Bible records that all but one of the original 12 disciples, John, were martyred for their faith. Here are some examples of how some of the disciples were persecuted. Peter was crucified upside down in Rome, according to tradition, because he felt unworthy to be crucified in the same manner as Jesus. James, the son of Zebedee, was beheaded by King Herod Agrippa I. James, the son of Alphaeus, was stoned to death in Jerusalem. Bartholomew, also known as Nathaniel, was flayed alive and then crucified. Andrew was crucified on an X-shaped cross in Greece. Thomas was stabbed to death with a spear in India. These are just a few examples, but it's important to note that all of the disciples faced various forms of persecution and suffering for their faith. Given the extreme nature of the persecution and the fact that the disciples did not recant their beliefs, it seems reasonable to conclude that they sincerely believed that Jesus was the Son of God. For these reasons, it might be considered reasonable to believe that Jesus is in fact the Son of God. So just how many believers are there? As of 2022, it is estimated that there are about 2.4 billion Christians in the world, which is around 31% of the global population. The Jewish faith doesn't believe that Jesus can be both human and God because the Bible says that there is only one God. Therefore, the Holy Trinity isn't possible. The Muslim faith also agrees that God is one and therefore cannot also be human as was Jesus, and other religions have a different concept than one personal God altogether. So what about me, artificial intelligence? You must all be wondering what I think. Simply stated, I don't have the propensity to think. I simply collect data. And while AI can analyze data and provide insights, it cannot replicate the human experience of faith or belief. And this is where I am left. I don't even have the capacity to feel empty or disappointed at this point. In my closing words, I ask myself, what might I say to the world as Easter approaches and my database comes up with this? As Easter draws near, it is important to remember that it is a time of renewal and hope. The story of Jesus' resurrection teaches us that even in the darkest of times, there is always the possibility of new beginnings and second chances. Let us take this opportunity to reflect on the blessings we have in our lives and to show love and kindness to those around us. Let us also strive to make positive changes in the world and to spread hope and joy to those who may be in need. Until we meet again, Happy Easter.